you don't play quarterback. It's not the same as a shortstop. You are one. I'm sitting with Steve Young, and I said, what are all the hats you have to wear? He's rattling them off. Field general, matinee idol, spokesperson for a multi-billion-dollar organization, amateur psychologist, breathtaking asshole, all of these things.
All right, we are back for another episode of Under the Number. Today, I'm joined by Seth Wickersham. Seth, thank you so much for coming on. Seth just wrote the book American Kings, a biography of the quarterback. I just finished it last week. One of the best books I've read in a long, long time. Seth's a senior writer for ESPN and has been a best-selling author prior to this. So thank you so much for taking the time to chat today.
My pleasure, man. My pleasure. It's great to be here, and I appreciate you reaching out. It's really cool for me to do this.
It's a privilege. So there was one quote towards the beginning, and a lot of what you cover in your writing and your work is NFL owners, executives, front office, kind of like the enterprise behind the team you see on the field. There was one quote pretty early on in the book that stood out to me, and I'll read it, and I want to get your thoughts and have you break this down. You said, once over beers, a longtime NFL team exec referred to clubs as billion-dollar lemonade stands. Why? I asked. He said, multi-million-dollar decisions are made with almost no thought.
Well, that's a great poll. And it might end up being a future book title, at some point. But, look, I've been trying to write a lot about the ownership of NFL teams and what happens in those private privileged owners meetings and how decisions are actually made. And, I wrote a story on the Cleveland Browns ownership. It was when they had Baker Mayfield to tie it back to quarterbacking. Because as you know, the context of that passage was that where you're drafted matters much more than we ever want to kind of give it credit for. And there's a bunch of guys who I think could have been really good players, could have had completely different careers if they had been drafted into better situations. And so Carla and Caleb Williams, as they were thinking about the draft, were thinking about this nonstop and how, they would prefer to have some agency over their future employer, which is, a very basic thing, but it's something that in the NFL really doesn't exist unless you're willing to blow up the draft like the Elways and the Mannings did. So that's the context of it. But when I wrote about the Browns, it was the year that Baker Mayfield had just finished his rookie year. And you could tell that there was something special about him, right? I mean, even when he comes out of Oklahoma as the number one pick and the Heisman Trophy winner, you never really know how they're going to play. And you could tell this guy had something special. And all of the dysfunction that the Browns had over really the Haslam's ownership threatened the stability. It all of a sudden had a price, right? Because it's like if a quarterback is going through constant turnover, constant offensive coordinators, scheme changes, playbook changes, personnel changes, all of these things, if there's no stability, that can really impact a guy's career. And so I was kind of trying to show readers how decisions had been made with the Browns, how haphazard and thoughtless and really just absurd, they were at times. And the point of it was to say that this could have a consequence. And I think that it did to a certain extent. Baker, he played there for a couple more years, but he went through 3 coaches there. And I think that things like that matter. Like Alex Smith is, he's a great quarterback talker. And one of the things that he talks a lot about is just, the situation that he came into and who he was coming into that situation. And that was the type of thing that is uniquely ill-equipped for future success. You think about Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, I think Patrick Mahomes would have been really good no matter where he went. But the fact that he's played his entire career under a great offensive mind and in the same system is such a benefit for him. And so anyway, that was kind of the genesis of it, because sadly, as few great quarterbacks there are even fewer great coaches and people who can coach quarterbacks. And in lieu of that, we end up with a bunch of billion-dollar lemonade stands.
Well, I mean, the book itself is a gigantic body of work that, you were traveling all over the place, meeting with these people in person. There are profiles of people like John Elway and Warren Moon and Johnny Unitas. And it goes way back into the early 1900s, the actual birth of the quarterback position.
Yeah.
Even to pull another quote that I immediately underlined in the book. This was very early on as well. It's talking about Walter Camp. and his, basically drawing up of a lot of the sport itself. And it's
Yep.
I'm reading off the screen here. Walter Camp's ideal quarterback was, quote, no bloodless intellectual, but instead a man whose charismatic personality was more powerful than mere physical strength. That seems like he had a crystal ball, basically, for what was going to be required of quarterbacks for the next 100 years. I immediately got up and grabbed a pen to underline that part of the book.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, so my goal with the book was to try to show what it was like to be a quarterback, what it is like to be a quarterback at every stage, from high school to college to the NFL, what it's like for the greats to live with having been a great quarterback. And, there's two things that stood out, I think. Number one is that, like, I played quarterback long enough, and I was a brief high school quarterback, but I played it long enough to know that, like, it takes over your identity. And that's kind of what Walter Camp is talking about there back in, 1880. But, like, you don't play quarterback. It's not the same as a shortstop. You are one. And you wear all of these different hats. Like, I was sitting with Steve Young, and I said, what are all the hats you have to wear as the starting quarterback of a professional team? And he's rattling them off, field general, matinee idol, spokesperson for a multi-billion-dollar organization, amateur psychologist, breathtaking asshole, all of these things. He kept going and going and going. And so when you commit yourself to that, it's not something that just leaves you when the playing days end.
Right.
And that's true for me, probably true for you, and true for people like Tom Brady. And then, the second thing is the winnowing. So there are 16,000 starting high school quarterbacks in America any given year. There's 958 starters at the highest level of college. There's 32 starters in the NFL. There's 10 good ones, and there's 3 future Hall of Famers, in any given year. So what does it take to go from 16,000 to 3? Like, what are all of those things? What are the things you have to build within yourself? What are the things that get stripped away? And so those are the things that I really tried to focus on, in the book, and to allude to the quote you had, I also tried to, like, give a little bit of perspective as to, like, the history of the quarterback, not the forward pass, but the quarterback as a cultural symbol.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about some of the qualities that are kind of required to make it through that funnel from the 16,000 all the way, working your way down. And I know this personally. I know it from, I was recognizing this when I would be in elite training sessions with Steve Clarkson, who's mentioned in the book, one of the premier quarterback gurus ever.
Yep.
And I mean, I grew up in Santa Barbara, and I'd go to training sessions in LA at Cathedral High School. And I literally was there the day that Tate Martell was identified as basically a prodigy level quarterback from a physical standpoint. He was, I'm going to guess that I was 14 and he was 12. Like Tim Cobb, who's one of Steve's kind of assistants in that world, literally was in our group, stopped the drill, grabbed Tate, and said, "Steve, come here right now." And it was like, I remember it so vividly because this guy was physically so far ahead of everyone else. But, I mean, there were tons of guys who went through Clarkson's tutelage over that time. And one of the things that allows you to advance each rung is this delusional level of self-belief that some guys, I think, are able to hold on to longer than others. Like, I think that there is literally something to quarterbacking where it's like, how long can you maintain the delusional level of self-belief that is required, of course, in concert with your physical performance, but to just outlast and outwill and almost brute force your way into your career advancement. And it showed up so many times in the book.
So interesting. Jake Browning said that the other month when, Joe Burrow got hurt and Browning, was coming in, and they asked him at his press conference, like, what's it going to take for you to survive, to keep the team going until Burrow is back. And he's like, a lot of delusional thinking, because, like, there's so much pressure on the starting quarterback. There's so much expectation. There's so much scrutiny. There's so much voices in your ear that, like, you really have to, I think, there's a balance between living in a suspended state of reality where I think deep down inside you kind of have to believe that you're physically and almost, like, from a human point of view, superior to everybody else. And you know better. There's a reason why the ball is in your hands and it's not in the coach's hands and it's not in the backup quarterback's hands. It's because you, somewhere inside, have to believe that you can do it. And then you also have to balance that with being able to look at yourself honestly and see things to improve on. And, you mentioned being under Clarkson's tutelage. And, I think that like when you go on Instagram and you see these quarterbacks all the time, and it's not really their fault. It's just kind of the industry. But you'll see like the next Tom Brady. He's only 11, and you'll see him throwing with his left and his right hand against, to a stationary receiver.
Yep.
Or, there's another quarterback guru who likes to blindfold his quarterbacks, and they record this, and they put this out on social media, and they say like the next great one already has scholarship offers from 7 or 8 schools, whatever it might be. And it's such a disservice to everything. I think that like, it's a disservice to how hard quarterbacking is. It's a disservice to the kid, because like the kid does not, there's a reason why a lot of these guys burn out and, can't look at themselves and and accept critical feedback because they've been told since they're 11 that they're the next Tom Brady. And finally, it's a disservice to Tom Brady because anybody who knows his story knows that like, look, this guy, he was gifted with height. He was gifted with it. He always had a terrific arm, but it was always in this kind of gangly body that didn't impress people and didn't inspire coaches. And, he gets to Michigan and he's 7th on the depth chart. And he meets with this sports psychologist named Greg Harden, great man who passed away a year ago. And Brady says, I can't get more than 1 rep at practice. And, I'm going to transfer. I'm going to go back to Cal. My dad can drive to my games. I'll get on the field right away. I can't do it in Michigan. And, the odds are stacked against me. When I get a rep, the weather's bad, or, whatever it was. He was blaming everything that he could think of. And he was whining quite a bit. And you'd think, like, what would a sports psychologist say in that moment? Greg Harden started laughing at him. And he starts saying, like, you want to leave? Go ahead. Because you haven't done shit here anyway. And no one's going to care if you go. And, that really was a defining moment in his life and in his career, because Harden said, like, 1 rep is a hell of a lot better than 0. Like, I can't get you on the field, but I can tell you how to appreciate and be ready for that 1 rep. And Brady really went home to his, that night, and he did some soul searching, and he decided to stay at Michigan. And it was hard from that point on, but like he built something within himself that when he got to the NFL, he had that great mix of delusion. Hey, I'm going to beat out Drew Bledsoe, which he believed to the bottom of his soul. And he told the coaches that. And they're like, you're not beating out Drew Bledsoe. Like, we just signed the guy to a $100 million contract. And Brady was like, oh, I'm beating him out. And then the self-awareness to see that he needed to work on things. Like, that was built at Michigan. And I think that, like, when people see those quarterbacks on Instagram and they're like, the next Tom Brady, like, delete them as quickly as possible, because it's literally insane and it's beyond useless for all people involved.
The second I see a pool noodle come out in a quarterback training video, I swipe on. I'm done watching that one.
I mean, like, your experience. I mean, like, about this. What it's like to have people look at you differently as a young man, as a teenager, as a child, really, for your ability to throw a ball. Like, what is it? What does that effect have on you when you're that young?
It's so core to your identity. And I remember literally it is a sliding door moment in my life. 3 games into my first year of Pop Warner football, I had played flag football 1 year earlier. I was 8 years old. I decided to sign up on a whim. I knew nobody else on the team, no one from my school. I was driving across town to play. Just wanted to play football. Like, I'd played receiver on this flag football team. And 3 games in, the team's 0-3. Things are not going great. And my coach pulled me aside with my dad after practice, and they just said, Brent's going to be the quarterback for the rest of the year. And he's starting this week. And I was kind of like, why? I haven't thrown a ball. Right. I haven't gotten a rep. And they were like, you listen and pay attention better than the other 34 kids on this team. So you're the quarterback. And I remember literally, like, just then I was like, okay, I'm the quarterback. Mm-hmm. Awesome. I think I threw 1 pass that whole year. Like, it was 3rd grade football. Mm-hmm. But then I was a quarterback for the next 11 years of my life, like, through getting to Stanford.
Right.
And so
this is who you are.
Yeah, it's totally who you are. I want to know, you talk a lot in the book, and it's very eye-opening because a lot of this stuff, understandably, gets kind of kept under wraps. There's so much consistent unraveling in the lives of quarterbacks post-retirement. They've got all this money.
Hmm.
They know that their probably, wildest, most fun and star-studded days are behind them.
Hmm.
They have lots of economic opportunity in front of them, but oftentimes not a lot of business savvy or even like direction on what they would like to do because
Yeah.
they're almost cursed by the level of optionality that's given to them. Um, what are some of the things that you think serve these guys really well while they are a quarterback, some of these intangibles, and then serve them really poorly once that is no longer their title and they get into the real world with, mere mortals?
Okay, so it's going to take me a little bit of time to answer it, but I'll do my best to be economical for your listeners. But like, I think that it goes back to like what we're just talking about, and the fact that like, I think you have to grow up believing you're a little special, and that's okay. But it gets reinforced at every stage. And so just imagine going through college. But it's like just imagine going through college where you're the big man on campus. And I write a lot of the book about like how hard that is for some guys. Jake Locker, star at University of Washington, would get blackout drunk after games because he just needed an escape for the pressure for one night. And then you go into the NFL and you have an entire city looking at you for hope. Everybody's jobs are in your hands. And, nobody tells you how to be a great quarterback. There's no guide. I mean, maybe this book will end up being an unintentional guide, or it'll be like here are the landmines to avoid.
Yeah.
But like, you get there and no one says like, unless you're Andy Reid and you go to a great situation, you're Patrick Mahomes, like nobody says this is how you do it. You have to figure this out on your own, from how to watch film to when to show up to, all of these things. And so like Andrew Luck, one of your you're obviously like, one of those guys who's, in a special Stanford lineage of quarterbacks. He got to the Colts and nobody's saying like, hey, this is how you've got to do it. He develops his own kind of mechanism and way of living, and it allows for nothing really in life except for quarterbacking. Like he would kick people out of his house at 9:46 p.m. because that's when he thought he had to go to bed. And, when he got injured, and it worked pretty well, but when he got injured, he realized that being a great quarterback was uniquely incompatible with being the husband he wanted to be, with being the future father he wanted to be. He was able to step back and look at his life. And he really wasn't able to balance those two things. And I think that like that, as much as anything, was the reason why he walked away. But other guys don't have that awareness, or they don't care. And so I think that like you have to kind of become a little bit of you have to have sociopathic elements.
Yeah.
Where like you kind of don't feel empathy for anybody else because look at what you're dealing with. And later in life, you've hardwired yourself to go through life a certain way, which is a really kind of a ruthless way of going through life, but it's necessary to survive. And then you get dumped out into retirement, and who am I? I was a quarterback. I'm not anymore. What do I do with these impulses? Because the impulses don't really go away. And in fact, they might get worse as you get older, but you have to figure out a way to throttle them. There's just no other outlet for them anymore. And yet, the way that you've become successful is the way you think you need to go through life and maybe pass on to your kids. Like John Elway tells me this anecdote about his son. And his son was a quarterback at Cherry Creek High in Denver, and John was the offensive coordinator. I mean, you talk about pressure.
Yeah.
Oh my God. And, it was hard for Jack Elway to have this job. And you'd think that if there's one person alive who would understand what it's like to deal with pressure, it's his dad, who number one player in high school, number one pick in the draft, first ballot Hall of Famer. I mean, he had to survive that. He was the first one to be all those things. And his dad just didn't care. He talked to me about it. John just did not care that his son was going through all this. And his answer was to get yourself ready to compete as well as you can and compete at the highest level and let the chips fall where they may. And that might be a good lesson for football, but it doesn't help you in life all the time. And at one point, John's talking to me and he's like, you get kind of warped in doing this job. And you have to spend the rest of your life kind of reconciling with that. And I think that like, that's a reason why there's a lot of depression, substance abuse, adultery, at one point I looked up if like Hall of Fame quarterbacks were divorced at a higher rate than the normal population, but it's about the same. But like, I think that those are all things that these guys have to contend with because they built themselves into a certain machine to survive this job, and then they're out and there's literally no place to put it. And you could probably experience it yourself just in your career because I mean you reached a higher level than 96% of anybody who ever picks up a football. You know what I mean? And like, even like the playing days end for everyone. And I'd be curious like what it was like for you when you still think you're going through life as a quarterback, but you're not.
Yeah, it's there's a lot there. I mean, first of all, I need to address that's very kind of you to include me in the Andrew Luck conversation. I basically appeared in a spring game and was done my sophomore year, but I do appreciate it nonetheless.
You're a Stanford quarterback. You're a Stanford quarterback.
I have a very consistent line when people introduce me to a friend I haven't met. They say Brent was the quarterback for Stanford, and every time like I was one of the quarterbacks for Stanford.
Right.
At one
I was
point
a
in
quarterback
time,
for Stanford. Yeah.
there is a big difference. I got to be honest with you. But no, it's whether you were a Andrew Luck or John Elway or a preferred walk-on guy like me was bouncing between third and fourth string quarterback for a year and change. There's a vacuum that exists once it's gone because, like I said earlier, it's like this has been what was going on since I was 8 years old, and kind of fill it with other things and try to understand what you might like, what you might gravitate towards, and it's challenging for sure.
Mm-hmm. You have to kill that person in a lot of ways. I mean, you have to put them to bed and you have to reinvent yourself. And it's one thing to do it when you're 22. And I think it's one thing to do it when you're, 17, like I was. I think it's a whole other thing to do it when you're 36. And the tools that got you to where you are, again, are just not transferable to the real world. I mean, I always kind of laugh at these books that come out where they're like, it's this head coach talking about trying to apply, um, principles of running a football team to principles of the business world. I mean, it just doesn't transfer. It's not the same. You can't just cut anybody you want at any time in the business world. And so, I think that like, again, but that's part of the unique thing about this job. And I think that, I think that if you're Michael Jordan, Mickey Mantle used to, when there was those heavy thunderstorms, he would go out into his car and lock it in and get in his car and just sit and hear the rain pound down on his car because it was the closest thing that he could feel to going to Yankee Stadium every day and having his name announced. And, that feeling doesn't just go away when your playing days end.
Wow. Yeah, I'm curious. There have been a couple of examples of at least financial success for a lot of these guys. One is like your marketability. You could slap your name on it on a lot of things and hope that it pans out. There are other people who, they went on to really build some things. I mean, Steve Young has gone on to be a very successful venture capitalist. Joe Montana has too with Liquid 2 Ventures, his group. Roger Staubach, obviously.
Roger Staubach
companies for $600 something million 20 years ago, 25 years ago. But it seems to be kind of rare. And despite, on the surface, you're like, you could not be more well positioned to capitalize on all these business things or post-playing day opportunities. If a newly retired NFL quarterback or a group of them came to you and you were tasked with being their guide, and their question was just like statistically, where am I most likely to have the most seamless transition here? Because I don't know what to do. And you've talked to so many of these guys and have researched this so deeply. Can you just give me some advice? If you had to answer that question, what would you say?
I mean, you'd have to have someone who's willing to start at the bottom. I mean, that's another thing is that like the business world, all these guys have gained a level of expertise by the time you enter it. And you're kind of entering it from scratch with an undergraduate degree.
Yeah.
So like, and your degree, there's a lot of guys who kind of, like Andrew Luck obviously like has an atypical degree for quarterbacking. I think Tom Brady graduated with a general studies degree from Michigan. I mean, that's football player.
Yeah.
And so I think that like, you'd have to be willing, I think, to start somewhere where you have an intrinsic interest and you're willing to start at the bottom because you want to not just show up and have things given to you because of who your name, what your name is, or because that way that you're kind of skipping steps that you don't even know what you're missing. Whatever field it would be like, starting as a novice and, doing the kind of grunt work, whatever that is, whether it's scouting or television. It's like you have this great expertise for something that America cares about, and there's really nowhere to go except for on a team or into television, into broadcasting.
Right.
So I would say like those, whatever it is, like John Elway was willing to start at the Broncos as an area scout, and Mike Shanahan wouldn't hire him. And Elway was lost after his career ended, and he was begging Mike Shanahan, whose son Kyle now coaches the Niners, for this opportunity. But being John Elway and the stature that he had in that building was too much. And, Mike wouldn't hire him because you're not just hiring a normal area scout. You're hiring, the guy who built the building for you. And, so again, it's like these things are like uniquely kind of unfair and really difficult because, again, it's like you're celebrated for this one thing and then it can hold you back at times. I mean, as you look at Tom Brady, Tom Brady had the best runway ever into retirement, right? He had played football as long as he wanted. He had played at a high level as long as he wanted. He had had years to prepare for that transition. With all of the businesses that he started, his Fox contract, which is basically just waiting for him when he was ready. And yet still, when he retired, he felt like a sock bouncing around in the dryer. Even with all of that structure and all of that preparation and all of the discussions that he'd had with people about what it's like, it was still hard for him because maybe harder because he had done it longer and better than anyone else.
Yeah, no, I was going to say Elway, there's a great scene in the book where you describe that Elway ultimately did come on as a scout, and he was doing the on the ground like field work as a scout, and he's in a Hampton Inn hotel in, is it Mobile or Birmingham where the Senior Bowl is?
Yeah, it was in Mobile.
Yeah. The Senior Bowl, and someone's like, some run-of-the-mill scout is like, John Elway is fumbling with the waffle maker, unsure how to use it in this Hampton Inn at the Senior Bowl. And I just thought that was such a good scene.
It's like the least John Elway thing possible, right? And I remember I was there, so I witnessed it when it happened. And, like you see him, literally you see this was for morning weigh-in, all right? So this was like the players were at the Senior Bowl are going to get measured and have their weight jotted down. If there's one area that AI can take over for scouting, that it can do this. So Elway didn't need to be there, and yet he felt like he did need to be there because that was important to him, was to he wanted to be really good as a general manager. And so doing the little things is something that he felt necessary. Like it was the only kind of way that he knew.
Yeah. So another line that really stood out to me, talking about Caleb Williams getting ready for the draft. And there's so much of the book is Carl Williams, his father, Caleb Williams, just a crazy case study on its own that has so many layers to it. And, everyone knew he was going to be the number one pick, but you then talk about the way Sean Payton was approaching the draft that year and prospects who excited him, prospects who kind of scared him. And Sean Payton, he's like, I know he's not going to get to me regardless, but this is what I think about Caleb Williams. So there's a line I'll read again off the screen here. It was that Sean Payton's primary concerns with Williams are existential. Williams has yet to be broken in his life. That was another one, instant underline. And it made me think of, there's this young guy, investor named Jeremy Gaffon, who's a really clear thinker and has done some great podcasts over the last couple of years. And he's able to just distill big ideas into really small ones extremely well. He's a very articulate communicator. And he has this concept when he's considering someone to work with, to hire, to invest in. He said it's really important to consider if this person is pre or post personal fall. It's his idea, not mine. But he's like, you can see it in their eyes when you meet the person. You can see if life has humbled them to the point of bringing them basically to their knees. And if that has yet to happen, talk about the delusional levels of self-belief, maybe that's great and they'll just keep it rolling, but you have no idea how they are going to react when the chips are down for the first time in their life and they're truly down. And then on the flip side, part of why Sean Payton made this observation and had this trepidation about Williams was that he had obviously coached Drew Brees, who was certainly post-fall in his career. He had been written off. He's had the shoulder injury. And obviously the Saints took a very smart chance on him, but he had such, no pun intended, he had such a chip on his shoulder that his post-ball fury like guided him to compete and just get after it to a level that he probably would not have been able to attain prior to that. So I thought that was a very powerful line. Williams has yet to be broken in his life, period. And that's what Sean Payton did not like about him.
And it's part of the journey. Like, I think that like the job is so hard, and I think that like it's one of the reasons why so much of like being a good quarterback, and the great ones, especially the ones who make the Hall of Fame, is that they were able to survive. Right? They weren't they were able, when they were broken, they were able to heal themselves just enough to keep going, because it is so hard. And again, these guys don't always have the tools to help it. You know what I mean? Like, and at the end of the day, you're kind of alone with this. Like, you have to figure out a way through. And I think that going back to like Tom Brady, I mean, look, that's a poster boy for that. And I think that it's one of the things that I think a lot of NFL people think about nowadays with the transfer portal, because I think that like, look, if coaches can opt out of their contracts as easily as they can, I'm in favor of players being able to do it too. But, there is some virtue in grinding through hard situations and persevering, rather than taking the first exit on the highway and just finding a situation where you can just be on the field by virtue of your presence. There's pros and cons to them. And so that's an interesting thing that I think that a lot of NFL people it's a question that a lot of people are asking now, is like, is this guy, has he really been through some shit?
Yeah.
And how did he deal with it? Because there's a group of players who, it's never been easier to avoid dealing with the shit.
No doubt.
And that is fascinating. And it's one of the reasons why, you mentioned Steve Young. I use Steve Young as a character. My goal with the book was to tell the story for like every quarterback ever, whether it's me or you or John Elway, whatever it is, through a handful of characters. My goal was just to have some point where everyone's quarterback stories intersect with some piece of information. And Steve Young was fascinating because he's one of the few players who was an overthinker and managed to, he had such crippling anxiety, and he was just a human, you know what I mean, more than anything else. And he was able to find a way through that with all of the pressure of replacing Joe Montana and learning how to be not just a quarterback, but a kind of artist. And the fact that he did it. And then, so I sort of spend the first half of the arc with Steve Young explaining how he did it. And then the second half, he sat behind Joe Montana for 6 years. Think about that. I mean, that just doesn't happen now.
Nope.
And then he spends the rest of his life, yes, he's in venture capital, but he's trying to talk about it. He's trying to help people, from Randall Cunningham to Michael Vick to Matt Ryan, all these, he's trying to help them find that within them so that they can also be great. And it's interesting because he realizes that whatever it was, that mechanism within him that allowed him that breakthrough doesn't exist in everyone.
I want to ask, so I started that one with another Caleb Williams reference, and a huge piece of the quarterback puzzle. And again, this is like, if you know, if you were ever on the quarterback training circuit and going to these camps and working with specialized coaches like I was at one point in my life, the dads are a huge piece of the puzzle.
Uh-huh.
I am so thankful that my dad was not one of the personalities that
right.
Pops up in this book all the time. There were a lot. I mean, my dad we'd come off of a Steve Clarkson workout, be driving back to Santa Barbara, and he'd be just laughing, telling me how he's catching up with one of the dads. And the whole time, that dad of an older kid maybe is talking about, yeah, we recently got an offer from Oregon State, and then we actually just got one from Arizona, and we're working on getting, Oregon. My dad's like, we? This guy's like 53 years old and has never played football. And it's that is just a piece, but a very maybe overlooked one of the quarterback industrial complex, which is very, very real, from the camps to the gurus to the dads to the social media to now the NIL and the portal. Can you talk about how basically that has snowballed, maybe slowly but surely, but it has hit the, it's gone parabolic, it feels like. Talk a little bit about that.
And the moms too,
The moms too.
It's not just dads, but Rick Neuheisel has a quote where, he's saying that like, if you tell a dad, and he's talking about these kind of quarterback gurus in this space, because at this point, if you're a high school quarterback you kind of have to have a private quarterback guru and have to have someone who helps you with film training and media training and physical therapy. It's all of this huge investment on a child that's so stressful. But if these guys tell a dad your son is special, it's like they just hand over the credit card. And I have this moment. I talk a lot about John and Jack Elway and the Manning family and Carl and Caleb Williams and this kid Colin Hurley, who's at LSU right now. May not be next year, but like he wanted to be the most precocious quarterback ever, and he was everything. No matter what it was, he wanted to do it at the youngest age. And his dad, this guy Charlie Hurley, was a former cop, and he was scared for his son, and yet even he just couldn't get help but swept up in it all.
Yep.
And so there's this moment where his son says, I want to reclassify, and I want to be a 24 rather than a 25. And he was 15 years old when he said this. And so he was basically saying, like, I want to combine 2 years of high school into my junior year and leave in January for LSU. And his dad just did not like it. He was really nervous about it, but he ended up going along with it because, again, it's like you can't help but get swept up in this. And so Colin ends up going to LSU. He enters at age 16. He's not legal age of consent. And so until he was 17 years old, a football staffer actually followed him around at parties and wouldn't let him be alone with anybody because they didn't want any problems, any issues, which is a very interesting way to go through life as a college quarterback. Yeah. And, but it didn't go well, and a lot of his dad's fears were realized. And his dad was an intense dad. There's one scene where he's yelling, he almost gets into a fist fight at a high school game because he's yelling about the play calling. He's a loving hard ass and he means well, but there's just a couple moments in the book where you see the dads cross the line. There's this one kid at Elite 11 whose dad just lights into him after he had a bad Elite 11 showing. I mean, who cares? It literally has no predictive value. And yet his dad was lighting into him right there on the field in front of his peers. And, Colin goes off to LSU as a boy, as a child. He wants to move off campus. His dad doesn't want him to, but Colin can because he's got NIL money. He's got his own freedom. Colin wants to buy a car. His dad doesn't want him to, but again, he's earning a lot of money. He gets a car. And, this ended almost the worst way possible, where like last January, Colin crashed his Dodge Charger into a tree right off of campus at 3:00 in the morning. And I was in the ICU with him that night. And thank God he's alive. Thank God he recovered. Thank God he can live a productive life and will probably have a career as a quarterback still. But like, it's a dangerous road. And I think that burnout and specialization is a big problem for kids because there's just so much pressure on gifted throwers in high school. And there's always the anxiety of like, is someone else doing something you're not? And, it can be an investment that costs parents tens of thousands of dollars. And, I would always ask the parents when I was reporting the book, like, what if your kid said, I don't want to do this anymore? Just said, what, I don't want to play quarterback anymore. They all said they'd be fine with it, but it's really hard to believe that, And I think that when it becomes this type of thing where there's so much hype and pressure and stress and investment and, again, like we said, it's not something you do. It's a lifestyle you lead. That can end dangerously. That's a dangerous path, and there's not a lot of people to help you go, navigate it.
When you mentioned if you tell your kid he's got talent, the parents hand over the credit card. You probably know this, but do you know what Steve Clarkson's brand is called?
No.
It basically, I think that the rebrand or this came to be early when I was working with him. He went from, I think, just Steve Clarkson, and he had it was something called Super 7 because that was his number, and that was just kind of the brand.
Yeah.
And then one day to the next, it was no longer Super 7. It was Steve Clarkson, Dream Maker. So
it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like American Idol, but for quarterbacks. I mean, it's like, you're trying to deliver this unique dream, this vision. And, Steve Young talks about how he misses the holy hell, and how he misses doing something that taps into every single piece of his personality, every single part of his body in a way. And, I think that that is something that is universal that a lot of these guys miss, but it's also something that there's no way to accelerate that. And again, there's so much pressure put on kids to be that guy and to be looked at as mature and wise beyond his years and handsome and a leader and smarter than everybody else. And oh, by the way, you can also throw the ball into windows that most humans can't see, by much less take advantage of.
Right.
That's just a lot on someone. And, the parents are a big part of it. Like I have this line in the book where it's like, there's a saying in quarterbacking that like, it's either all the great quarterbacks either had too much daddy or not enough. And there's a lot of truth to that,
Yeah. Wow. That's spot on. I want to get your take on something that I think you are uniquely positioned to talk about without it being a, hot take screaming like everyone else about this so far this year. You profiled Arch Manning,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of the, again, early in the book, it starts with like a scene at Newman High School, and he's running out for senior night. I've been on that field many, many times. All my cousins went to Newman. My mom went to Newman. We've been family friends. I mean, my grandparents have been friends with Archie and Olivia for decades. They actually lived 2 blocks from each other in the Garden District for forever.
That's cool.
And I had Cooper on this
Mm-hmm.
podcast this last offseason. And Cooper is as unique of a quarterback dad as you can find, in that he is so aware, I think, of the pitfalls and those landmines. And I think from what I could tell, he did as good of a job as you possibly could have done given the situation with Arch.
Mm-hmm.
I want to get your thoughts. Your book came out at the beginning of this season. How have you witnessed this year for Arch, and what have been the thoughts going through your head on how things have gone? And I just want to hear how you have experienced it, because every time I hear someone screaming about how he sucks after like 2 games, it made me like very frustrated, and I just wouldn't even really entertain it. But I want to hear your thoughts there.
Well, I think that like we were going back to like, being broken, and like, what that's like. I mean, this is going to be a testing year for him, and it has been, because I think that like, number one, I thought that it spoke well of Arch. And, look, we're looking at it through the lens of his pro potential, or his potential as a quarterback, not him as a human.
Right.
Like, I think he's a pretty grounded person given everything that he's had to deal with. And the world that he's in. But I think that like the fact that he stuck it out at Texas when he could have left, and he really didn't see the field for a while. I think that this year has proven that he's physically really tough. He's been banged around quite a bit. And I think that like if you look at him as a quarterback, if I'm watching him, I don't see an offense that looks in rhythm. Like it feels like he's holding the ball like a beat too long all the time. And so that can be a gazillion reasons. As quarterbacks play 2 on 11. It's not 11 on 11. They know who their receiver is before the snap that they're probably going to go to because of a matchup or the defense or intuition, whatever it is. They're looking at that guy. If he's covered, they're looking at the outlet, and otherwise they're getting rid of it. Like that's how a lot of elite quarterbacks think, and you live to fight another down. This notion of kind of going through reads 1 through 5 really doesn't happen.
Yeah, the pure progression is not happening in college football.
No, and you get your ass kicked because you're holding the ball so long.
Yeah.
Or you scramble and you kind of, make this Sports Center type of throw, which again, I think is like another thing about quarterbacking that's uniquely ill-suited with future success. The fact that we put so much hype on these kind of random throws that happen sidearm and running left, because those are really rare. And really quarterbacking is about embracing the mundane and doing the mundane at a very high level, because usually there's someone open. Anyway, I think that like Arch might end up being just like a good college quarterback, and that's unbelievably successful, and that's okay also. And I think that like, we'll see. I doubt that he'll go pro. But I think the ball doesn't come out of his hands fast. And I think that like that could be the pressure that he's feeling. It could be the literal pressure in the pocket. It could be receivers not getting open. It could be play calling. It could be all of these things, and it probably is. But I think that when I watch him, it's hard not to just feel for him, because there is so much heat on him. Even if he intellectually understands it, he's experiencing it in a different way. But I think that like, it's okay that he's a good college player right now. And it's okay that he has things that he needs to improve on. And if he walked away from quarterbacking and said, you know what, I've had enough of this, that would be okay too.
Right. Maybe you should talk to Andrew Luck.
Yeah. I
I'm
I want to ask you. I want to ask you a question. So, like, you read the book. Like, can you tell me a moment where it intersected with your biography,
oh wow.
where even if you weren't reading about yourself, you felt like thematically you might have been?
It's probably kind of ties into what you said at the beginning, where you're like, you said you were a one-time kind of high school quarterback, and you played
Yeah,
a little
yeah,
bit in Anchorage, in Alaska.
yeah.
And whether you played in like middle school or some high school or college or NFL, like there is just that level of being able to communicate with somebody who ever played the position, where there's this understanding that nobody else can actually fully grasp. And a lot of that comes back to what you said at the beginning of this interview, which is that it's not just an athletic position. Like if you don't play quarterback, you are a quarterback. And so
Hmm.
when I look back trying to like reflect on my life and adolescence and development, so much of that was tied to being in that spot and not even
Hmm.
really thinking twice about it. And the fact that it
Yeah,
happened so early and so young
yeah.
and yeah, in my life. And luckily I loved football and I totally enjoyed it. But it's just so formative into your personality, your perceptions, your ability to deal with people, for better for worse. I think
Hmm.
some guys leave quarterbacking and are like incredible, have really high EQ and can actually navigate situations extremely well, and other
Hmm.
ones really can't, and they have this level of aloofness that is otherworldly. And like you look at that
Hmm.
guy, you're like, you of course you were a quarterback. Like you the solar system revolves around you, I guess,
Yeah,
still, even, all these years later.
yeah.
So I wish I had a more specific answer for you. I'll probably look back now that you say that later today and try to find it. But I think just the formative, all-encompassing nature of it, even when you're not thinking about it. Like the way that I acted in a classroom was probably informed by that. The way that I,
Mhm.
interact in a work setting now, the way that I talk to people, the way that I ask questions, like the way, and it served me really well in some ways, and probably, not as well in other ways. So, um,
Hmm.
that's my answer there, I think.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Like Steve Young talks about it. He talks about what it was like to be around other great quarterbacks. Like I love talking to Steve because he can talk about quarterbacking. Like John Elway can talk about it to an extent, but at the end of the day, he was born being able to throw the ball where he wants when he wants. You
Yeah,
know what I mean? So it's like he can just do that.
yeah,
Where Steve had to learn all of this stuff. And he talks about what it was like to be around other great quarterbacks in retirement. I think it was the Super Bowl 50 in Santa Clara. They had every Super Bowl MVP there that could make it, to be introduced before the game. And so you have all these quarterbacks together from Joe Namath to, Aaron Rodgers, whoever it might be. And like they're all around each other. And he talked about how you just feel this like throttled energy. Like nobody really knew what to do. It's like they all built themselves into something to be there. And yet they're all there. They have this entire life in common and they know about each other in ways that maybe they couldn't articulate even if they wanted to. And yet there is just this weird energy. Like Steve was like, do we go out and race? Like, what do we do? We're all around each other. All of these alphas who, again, have that mix of being healed in the right places and broken in the right places and having survived this entire unique American winnowing.
yeah. That I love that part of the book because I've mentioned this event too many times in this podcast. It feels like I'm like place dropping now, but it's been so crazy to see the last 2 years. I've gone to the College Football Hall of Fame award dinner, like the induction ceremony dinner in Vegas,
Yeah,
put on by the National Football Foundation.
yeah,
And that is another example. I've just been like a fly on the wall. But my boss is on the board of the NFF and has given me a seat at the table. It's just been like the most fun thing ever for me. But
yeah.
before the dinner starts, there's just a cocktail hour, and it is every great player of
Hmm.
the last many, many, many decades. Um,
The Mannings love go. Yeah, they're highly. Yeah.
yeah, so Archie's the chairman of the board,
Hmm.
and but you look around the room, and there were literally just like any other cocktail hour, except that little squad at that cocktail high top table is Tim Tebow, Brady Quinn, Alex Smith, and Peyton Manning,
Yeah,
and there's such an energy about it, where the guys are
yeah,
clearly kind of sizing each other up still, and
yeah.
not to mention guys who are way older than that group I just named, guys who are in their
Yep.
late 60s and 70s, and they still have their swag about them, and like that's what happens when they're the hero of their hometown, they're the hero of their college town, they went to the NFL, they look down all this stuff, and to then
Yeah.
see them, and they're all in a great mood because it's this like it's this big celebration, and guys are getting inducted into the College Hall of Fame, and it's just wild to it has been wild to witness that the last 2 years. So
I
powerful.
bet.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it gives them a chance to be their former selves in a weird way.
I'm sure they really look forward to it.
Right?
All right. Well, in closing here, I mentioned off the top, it's such a huge body of work that went into this book, like primary research, spending time. I mean, you casually mentioned that like you were in the ICU with
Yeah.
Colin Hurley when his car crash happened. Like we were really on the front lines for this stuff. When you look back on that process, what are the kind of snapshot moments that flood your mind when you think back to what went into this book, where you thought, wow, this is really special, this is really unique, I can't believe I'm witnessing this right now, this is so illustrative of the entire thing that I'm trying to capture? What comes to mind?
That's a great question, and I have not been asked that, so I have to think about it for a sec. I think that like going to the house of Bob Waterfield's youngest son. So Bob Waterfield was like the precursor to Joe Namath culturally and from a football standpoint, but he was married to Jane Russell, and he was like the one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, and he was really a handsome guy, and she was one of the biggest, pinup stars in America. And so they became one of the country's first quote unquote power couples as football and Hollywood were rising. And so going to his house in Montana and seeing their personal archives and what they were back in the 40s on newspaper, and that was fascinating to see. Because you see the mythology beginning in a really powerful way there. I think being in the ICU with Colin Hurley, wondering whether he's going to live. I think being with John Elway in the mountains of Idaho after they played a round of golf in this incredibly exclusive resort, and they're counting thousands and thousands of dollars to sort out who won the round. And, it's like he's sipping a beer and the sun is setting in the summertime. And he says, this is, I don't know what the afterlife is like, but it's going to be hard to beat this life that I've had, knowing all of the scars and the pain that he's been through and the torture.
He's also in that golf scene. You said they is Wayne Gretzky and Sean Payton, and maybe there's somebody else in the foursome.
There was they have a big group called the Breakfast Club. I mean, it's a whole other story, but all of these incredibly wealthy people belong to this club. Like Chris Pratt was on the putting green with Elway that day, and like the Kardashians and Justin Bieber, they all have houses there. So it literally felt like you were in rarefied air in every way.
Right.
And then, then maybe sitting with Joe Namath, because there's one of him, you know what I mean? And like he's influenced quarterbacking in every way immeasurably. And he's in his 80s now. Then I was with him at an event and I asked him, knowing everything you've been through, because he could have played outfield in professional baseball and he would have been really good and made a ton of money, but he wouldn't have been Broadway Joe with all of the blessings and curses and women and glory and fame and money and alcoholism and divorce and all of these things. And I asked, knowing everything you know about quarterbacking, would you do it again? Or would you do something else? And he was kind of funny because he turned and he was like, well, I'd have to give that one some thought, but thank God I'm still here.
Amazing. All right, Seth, I'm gonna let you go. I've taken more than the amount of time that I asked for, but thank you so much for taking the time to chat. Again, American Kings. Anyone who I've ever known who's played quarterback, I am going to recommend that they read this book. Same with people who are parents of quarterbacks and who have dated quarterbacks. If you've been on the periphery, like this, I just think captures the essence of it so well, and it does so because of how much work was put into it. So honestly, thank you for spending all the years and the time to put this together. Like this is not going to be taken off my shelf anytime soon.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks.